people that. So good evening, Rotarians and all colleagues in peace. I'm Jim Holderman. I'm the chair of the District 5450 Peace Committee, and we sponsor this wonderful program. I've heard of Chuck. I've known of Chuck for some time. I was somewhat aware of his tremendous gift to peace and through his teachings, his mediation work and director of the Peace Corps. But from the time his name went out on the forum, I have received so many exceptional comments of his tremendous work and his kindness as a human being. He's gifted Rotary with over many years with his presentations, his sharing, and his efforts. And tonight we are indeed honored to bring Chic to our audience, perhaps for his final talk. Chic, we are so happy. The floor or the screen is now yours.
Thank you so much, Jim. I really appreciate it. And it's an honor always to speak to a Rotary program, and especially this one with Rotarians who are particularly interested in the issue of peace, which has driven my life ever since I was in the Peace Corps. Jim mentioned that something about perhaps this being my last, and this is indeed the last speech I will ever give. And the reason for that is simply that I have Parkinson's disease, and it's nasty, and it is messing with my mind and with my voice, and just preparing for this, which should have been easy, was a lot of work, and I just can't do it anymore. So this will be my last shot at it. And I need to apologize because it may seem a little bit disjointed because part of what I've done is gone back over speeches and presentations I've done over the years and kind of plugged in some of the thoughts and ideas that I've had over the years. And so I'm going to just kind of throw them all in here and you can take them for what they're worth. The theme for this is building a culture of peace, which is a big part of what I've tried to do over the years. And I'll share a few stories of things I've been involved with, but mostly it's about what people in Rotary and in other organizations and communities can do to help build a more peaceful and less violent world. Among Rotarians, I've been involved with Rotary clubs all over the country, literally all over the world. I went to Brazil several years ago to speak at your international program, but I've gotten to know John Hugo, for example, who I just admire so greatly, your general secretary. And of course, Jim, you probably know Rudy Westervelt was a real strong Rotary E-Club. Peter Kyle here in Washington. Steve Werner is there in the Denver area. Dennis Wong, Al Jubitz, Dick Pyle, a returned Peace Corps volunteer. And I just got a phone call a few days ago from Chuck Woolery, who was there in Denver. And I knew Chuck long ago, and we've reconnected, and we're having a great time being back in touch. He's another Rotarian. So pleased to see what Rotary does with its E-Clubs, with its Action Group for Peace, and Peace Centers and Peace Fellowships, and the Rotary celebrates Peace Day and so on. So I'm just so pleased to see all the good things that Rotary does connected with the concept of building a more peaceful world. I was also just on my Facebook page a few days ago, and this just popped up out of the blue from Rotary, supporting peace building programs. So it's just something I feel a very close and strong attachment to, and really appreciate it. As those of you who heard me speak before have heard this, but I'll run through it one more time because it just seems to connect so nicely. When I meet with groups, Rotary clubs or others to talk about building peace, I like to start off with a quiz. And it's pass-fail. And the first question is, do you have any kids at home? If you ever raised any kids? And people always see, most people nod their heads. So if it's younger people, do you have siblings? Or if it's older people, do you have kids? And people nod their heads and say, well, they ever get into fights and disputes? And of course, everybody just kind of chuckles and says, well, yes, of course they do. So when they do you give them hand grenades? Well, no, of course not. Okay, just asking. And what about people in the neighborhood? You ever hear about disputes among neighbors? Well, yeah, of course we do. Well, when your neighbors get into a dispute, do they plant landmines on the border between their houses? No. Well, okay, just asking. And what about in the corporate world? Corporations ever get mad at each other? Well, yeah, of course they do. Do they drop bombs on each other's headquarters? No, of course not. Well, why not? Because it would be stupid. So if it's stupid to do it in our households and stupid to do it in our neighborhoods and stupid to do it in the business world, why do we revere it at a nation state level and at other levels? It's stupid. And I like to quote one of the great military men of all time, General Dwight Eisenhower, said, I hate war, its brutality, its futility, its stupidity. So when I talk about war as being stupid, I'm in good company, along with Dwight Eisenhower. But then we have the question, what can we do about it? And I was very inspired early on by George Bernard Shaw, and of course, there's something that Bobby Kennedy liked to quote. So you see things, and you say, why? I dream things that never were, and I say, why not? And I say, if our attitude about war is that it's stupid, and virtually everybody everywhere in the country and in the world feels the same way about it, I say, why not do something about it and try to reduce the frequency and severity of violent conflict? And like many of you on this call, I can tell by your gray hair, we were inspired by John Kennedy, who said one person can make a difference and everyone should try. And by the way, I edited what Kennedy said. He said every man should try, but for obvious reasons, I changed that to everyone should try. And of course, Kennedy said, ask not what you can do for your country, and ask what you can do for the world and for the good for the freedom of man. So I took those things, and they inspired me to see what I could do. And furthermore, I got involved with the whole concept of building a culture of peace. And the UN has had several resolutions around the concept of a culture of peace. And it's based on peace education, economic and social development, human rights, equality between men and women, democratic participation, tolerance, and free flow of information. And those of us who've been involved with the Peace Corps, though that's very much a part of what we try to do in the Peace Corps, and is what Rotary tries to do wherever it is, and anybody else involved in trying to build a more peaceful world. And those are among the fundamental characteristics of a culture of peace. And we can take a look at each of those things, and each of us in our own way can work on any of those elements and help build a culture of peace. For me, it started with the Peace Corps. Coming out of college, I was a student at Oklahoma State University. I went there on a football scholarship, of all things. I wasn't any good, but it paid my way through school. But I got involved in the free speech movement and the anti-war movement, and then went into the Peace Corps, and there became familiar with other peoples, other cultures, and developed an appreciation for and a recognition of what can be done on a global scale. So I was a volunteer in Colombia. I was just outside of Cartagena. I hate to admit that. Those of you who know about Cartagena know what a beautiful and wonderful place it is. So people say, yeah, Peace Corps Cartagena. That was tough. But the barrio I was in was abject poverty, about as poor as it gets, as you'll see in the next couple of pictures. This is the barrio I was in, and with virtually totally illiterate and struggling to survive out of fishing out of dugout canoes. Uh, Learned how to throw a cast net, but I worked with fishermen, helped them organize a fishing co-op so that they could get moted for their boats, better nets, and improve their ability to fish. They were fishing with dynamite, which was doing a terrible thing. In fact, let me go back. If you see, I don't know if this arrow points to it, but if you can see this guy right here, he's missing a hand. And he's missing the hand because it was blown off by the dynamite. And what I try to do is help the fishermen have a better way, a more viable way of catching fish than throwing dynamite. So I can't say that I ended dynamite fishing forever and forevermore, but we certainly were able to reduce it and help them have a better life. So that was my Peace Corps experience in Colombia. Uh, from there, years later, I ran several nonprofits, but years later became president of the National Peace Corps Association, the organization of returned Peace Corps volunteers and Peace Corps staff. And just a phenomenal experience. Got to know incredibly wonderful people like Mike and Moore and so many other returned Peace Corps volunteers. And we were able to help mobilize the RPV community to do valuable, important projects here in the US and all over the world. Coming out of that, John Garamendi, many of you know or know of, had been a Peace Corps volunteer in Ethiopia. And when I was leaving the National Peace Corps Association, I got a phone call from John one day. He said, Chic, my friends are killing each other and we've got to do something about it. He was talking about war breaking out between Ethiopia and Eritrea. I said, John, I don't have a clue what we can do, but let's give it a try. So we formed a small team of returned Peace Corps volunteers. We got in touch with the two embassies, and both of the embassies said, please help. We've gotten into a terrible situation. We can't figure out how to get out of it, but we trust you because you're Peace Corps people. The heads of state of both countries have been taught by Peace Corps volunteers. Their foreign ministers taught by Peace Corps volunteers. Their ambassadors taught by Peace Corps volunteers. They trusted us. So we developed a strong relationship with literally directly with the heads of state of the two countries. We had no authority whatsoever, except we were returned Peace Corps volunteers who wanted to see what we could do to help. So we were invited. We met regularly with the ambassadors, and we were invited to Asmara to meet with the president of Eritrea. There we are with Isaias Afwerki, the president of Eritrea. By the way, in that picture on the far left, as you're looking at him, is John. Next to him is Mike McCaskey, who passed away a few years ago, but at the time, Mike was the owner of the Chicago Bears football team. So it didn't hurt having the Chicago Bears guy as part of our team. So there we are meeting with Isaias Afwerki in Asmara. He met with us for 3 hours, just a group of former Peace Corps volunteers, the head of state, met with us for 3 hours to try to find a way to resolve this war between Ethiopia and Eritrea. Then from there, we flew down to Addis Ababa. We had no idea who we were going to be able to meet with in Addis or whether anybody would meet with us in Addis. So we'd had a little bit of communication with them, but nothing was confirmed. Our plane landed at the airport and nothing happened. We looked out the window and there are some people at the bottom of the ramp who looked very distinguished. So there must be some important people on this flight. So we said, once they get off, then I'm sure they'll let us get off and we'll find out where we're supposed to go and what we're supposed to do. The crew came to us and said, they're ready for you. We were the important people on the flight in this group of returned Peace Corps volunteers. And so they took us to meet with Meles Zenawi, the prime minister. We met extensively with him and with his foreign minister and with his staff and worked toward a resolution to the war. And we almost got there. We were so close. The one last issue is which country would control Badame, the small village that had been the focal point for the war between the two countries, where 100,000 people had died over this little town of Badame. And neither side wanted to give up control during the time that an independent commission would try to figure out a solution to it. We were finally, John and I were on the phone with Isaias, the president of Eritrea. We said to him, you've got control of this. If you're willing to accept Ethiopia controlling, because they had been controlling it up till then, if you're willing to let them control it, the war will be over. We have an assurance that the war will be over. Meles has assured us of that and that he will allow an independent commission to make the final determination and he will live by it. So we kind of see Isaias at the other end of the phone just kind of thinking about it, and reluctantly he said, okay, I'll do it. I jumped into a cab, went straight to the Ethiopian embassy. The ambassador wasn't there, but his charge was there. And I told him and said, we've just been on the phone with Isaias. And you assured me that if he agrees to allowing you to administer Badame, that the war will be over. They said, that's right, but he'll never do it. He's a warmonger. I said, well, he just did. And they kind of looked at me and said, you're kidding. I said, no, he just did. And they said, we don't believe you. I pulled out my cell phone to call him. They wouldn't let me do it. They couldn't let me use my cell phone to call the president of Eritrea from the embassy because there was no communication allowed directly between the two countries. Said, okay, tell the prime minister. 2 weeks later, Prime Minister Mellis came to Washington, invited us to have breakfast with him over breakfast. And I get emotional about this. And this was 20 years ago. But over breakfast, he said, I want you to know the war is over. And I want to thank you for making it happen. Team of Peace Corps volunteers, just doing what we could do to help bring an end to war. And pardon me, I still get emotional about it. It was a big deal. And the war indeed did come to an end. Just an indication of what private citizens can do if they have the will. And of course, we did have it. It helped that John had he had been Deputy Secretary of Interior. That gave us some status. Mike McCaskey and so on. But being able to do something like that just meant the world to us. And of course, most importantly, it meant the world to the people there. And in fact, when we went, we were invited to the treaty signing ceremony in Algiers. And afterward, Mellis sent us a letter saying your contribution was indeed invaluable for creating the momentum and the spirit which made this historic achievement possible. But more important than that was shortly after that treaty signing ceremony, I bought a hot dog at the corner of 18th and L in Washington. And the lady in the kiosk looked like she was probably from the Horn of Africa. So I asked where she was from, and she very proudly said she was from Eritrea. I said, I kind of thought so. He said, I know your president. She kind of stared at me like, who are you? I mean, who's buying a hot dog at 18th and L that knows anything about Eritrea, let alone knows the name of the president? I said, I'm Chic Dambach. And her eyes got big. She said, I know you. I know who you are. You brought peace to my country. A hot dog vendor at 18th and L knew who we were and what we had done. And that just means so much to me. And Yeshu and I remain dear friends to this day. Every time I'm in town, I always go to 18th and L, always get a hot dog from Yeshu, and she always comes out and we embrace in a big loving hug. I tell that story simply to say that it can be done. From there, we also, by the way, did something similar in the Congo, meeting with President Kabila and with the people involved with the rebellion there. Out of there, we went to the Alliance for Peace Building, the network of people and organizations, some 200 organizations and people around the world working together to try to build a more peaceful world. And the point being, of course, the peace doesn't just happen, you have to build it. And as a result of all that, people encouraged me to write up my story, and I finally did. I wrote up a memoir called Exhaust the Limits. And Matt Worker, those of you in Washington who know the publication Politico would recognize Matt. He's the political cartoonist for Politico, Pulitzer Prize winning cartoonist. And we've become good friends. We fly fish together. So Matt did the cover for the book, and I really treasure that drawing that he did. But the big question is, how are we doing? Is the world more peaceful or less peaceful?
Oh my God.
And the good news is that the world is actually more peaceful. Watching the news, it doesn't look that way. It looks pretty bad in the news. And in fact, the last few years, a few very unfortunate things have been happening. But in spite of that, in the long picture, we're doing pretty darn well. And Steven Pinker, the Harvard psychologist, in his book, The Better Angel of Our Nature, says we may be living the most peaceful era in our species' existence. There's every reason to believe that he is right about that. If you take a look at the curve of history, you go back to biblical times and the Roman times, the Colosseum and so on, and the Crusades and the torture that took place. And the picture in the lower left here with those long sticks, that's human heads at the ends of these stakes. That's in the French Revolution. These are the civilized French in the French Revolution. They would cut people's heads off and put them on the end of stakes and run it downtown celebrating the decapitation of the aristocrats in France. And that wasn't all that long ago. French Revolution, and then of course we had World War II and Auschwitz, and in the lower picture on the right is Hiroshima. So if you look historically, things were pretty darn bad, really downright awful. You can go back to the period of Stalin and Mao. They were killing people by the millions, by the millions. World War I, World War II, again, deaths in the millions, 70 million people in World War II. And you go through the rest of that period in history. Last year, as best the data indicates, that 223,000 people were killed in violent conflict last year. Still way too many people. Dreadful. But compare that with 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, especially when the population was much smaller. We are doing dramatically better today than we did historically. And I think it's important for us to recognize that. And part of that message is that it can be done. It's possible for societies that were once at war with each other to come to reach a period of peace and live peacefully. And what we try to do as peace builders is get more people to recognize and understand that, and recognize the futility and the stupidity of war, and to find other ways of resolving their differences. And in fact, coming out of World War II, we did create the United Nations, which people complain about, but the fact of the matter is it has done a phenomenal job with limited resources and limited mandate. We do not let the United Nations get involved in internal conflicts. It is set up to deal with international conflicts. And the fact of the matter is, until Russia invaded Ukraine recently, nation states invading other nation states to acquire control over them had virtually ceased to exist. Virtually ceased to exist. Think of any other. Since the creation of the United Nations, where a country invaded another country to try to gain control of that country, until Russia came along and tried to invade Ukraine. Very, very, very few. Pretty damn remarkable achievement for the United Nations, which operates on a minuscule budget. The operating budget of the United Nations, not counting its program budget, but its operating budget is less than that of Montgomery County, Maryland.
Oh,
Tiny, 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 tiny budget. And look what it's accomplished for the good of the world. So I want to give as much credit as possible to the United Nations and encourage people to recognize that and support it. And this is a chart just showing the curve of history, just reinforcing what I was saying about the progress we've made. If you look back in the 40s, and then, of course, in the 60s and 70s, you had the Vietnam War and Korea and so on. In the 1980s, the wars of national liberation in Africa and so on. But look at that. You get over to the current time period, it barely makes a blip on the chart. Barely makes a blip on the chart. That's where we are now. Phenomenal progress. So yes, we should be concerned about where we are, and we need to continue to work to make it better. But I share this because people say, so many people knowing what I do have said, Chic, you idealistic fool. Countries have always gone to war and they always will, and there's nothing you can do about it. I say, not so, not so. Look at this chart. Look at the progress that we have made, reducing the frequency and severity of violent conflict. It can be done. We just need to keep doing it and make it better yet. But I get so excited to share this story because most people think the world is worse off than it ever was. Well, not so. Hunger and poverty is, as I'm sure all of you know, has been reduced dramatically. It was 50 years ago, over half of the world's population lived in dire, dire poverty, hunger every day. Half the world's population. Now it's less than 10%. Phenomenal progress has been made because people like Rotarians, people on this call, care and are willing to step forward and do something about it. So don't give up. Recognize what has been done, learn the lessons from it of what works, and keep fighting to make it even better yet. And democracies have made huge progress over the years. If you look at this chart, just the green part of it at the bottom is the democracies. The yellow is kind of mixture of democracy, but it's now over half of the world's population now lives in a democracy. In fact, 65%, if you take full democracies and partial democracies, it's up to 65% of the world's population now. Pretty darn good. And of course, the correlation between democracy and peace and the culture of peace is indisputable. but look at that progress that we made. So don't get discouraged. Recognize the progress we've made and just learn what works and build on it to do even more. That's not to say it's perfect. This is a map that indicates with the colored sections the places where the world is still at war today and is still far, far, far too much. Of course, Russia and Ukraine is horrendous. What's happening in Gaza is beyond description. I'm deeply involved with Mali in the Sahel region, and it has gone through about 12 to 15 years of terrible fighting. South Sudan, of course, DR Congo, and so on. There are many other places where there is still a lot of work to be done, still peace to be built, peace to be made. But we have made progress. Let's just spread it even further and try to help it happen in these places. And so we have the concept of peace building, which came about a guy named Norung in Norwegian sociologist coined the term about 50 years ago, and it's evolved over the years. This is a definition that I used for it, and Wikipedia picked it up and used my definition for quite a long time. They have a different one now. I don't get credit for it on their page anymore, but I get to brag about it having been there for a little while. And I show it to my kids so they see Dad's name's in Wikipedia. Dad must be okay. So, and the new ones are pretty similar to this. A set of initiatives by diverse actors in government and civil society to address the root causes of violence and protect civilians during and after conflict, using communication, negotiations, mediation instead of belligerence and violence to resolve conflicts. Effective peace building is multifaceted and adapted to each conflict environment. So that's kind of this concept of peace building that has caught on all over the world. When we started doing it just a few decades ago, the term didn't exist 50 years ago, and there were virtually no organizations doing it. The premise, of course, is the peace makes sense. Peace is possible, but it has to be built. Therefore, we have peace building. Several people around the world have stepped in and made huge contributions to the concept. One of my favorites is the Institute for Economics and Peace, and a guy named Steve Killalay from Sydney, Australia. And Steve is one of my best friends. And Steve is a tremendously successful technology entrepreneur. Every ATM machine in the world and every stock market in the world uses his software, so he's done well. But after he developed that wealth, he wanted to do something worthwhile with it, and he started putting money in the most impoverished places in the world. But what he found was the common denominator among them was violence. So the places that were the poorest were dragged down by the violent conflicts. And Steve was a wellness guy, and he said, "Well, what are the peaceful places like?" And nobody could answer the question. He said, "Well, we'll find out." So he developed an index using the Economist Intelligence Unit to identify the characteristics of the most peaceful countries in the world and do an analysis of it to find out not who's at war, because the people at war are in the news. He said, who's at peace? And what are they doing right? As a wellness expert, he says, for wellness, you want to find out what healthy people are doing. So we know what ill people are doing. What are healthy people doing? He said, what are the healthy countries doing? And he created something called the Global Peace Index to rank the countries in the world based on their peacefulness, and then to do an analysis of them and the qualities and characteristics of those countries. And here's what he found. Was a series of 8 what he calls pillars of peace, things like a well-functioning government, a free flow of information, acceptance of the rights of others, low levels of corruption. Corruption, by the way, being one of the highest correlations between low levels of corruption lead to peace, high corruption leads to violence. So all of this is out there. I'd encourage you to look into the Positive Peace Report and get a real understanding about the qualities and characteristics of the most peaceful countries in the world, which those of us doing peace building can take to the people we're working with and say, if you want to become more peaceful, we would like to think you would. Here are the things you need to work on to make your countries and your societies more peaceful. Another one that is not very well known, but I would draw your attention to. And Carol, this is another returned Peace Corps volunteer who created this, guy named Jerry Glunn. has something called the Millennium Project, and he has identified 60 or 70 of the most brilliant people in the world, asked them the question about what will the future be like 10, 15, 20, 30 years from now. They do a detailed analysis of it, and each year they come out with a new book called The State of the Future. And this is the brand new one called State of the Future 20.0. It's the 20th edition of it. Tremendously important data and information about the state of the world and about where the world is going and what it will be like in the future. And he's concluded that this chart simply shows kind of a composite of the quality of life on the planet. And you just see it's been going up, 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 and up. And Jerry is satisfied that if we do the right things, then it will get better, continue to get better. However, in this analysis, as I'm sure you're all well aware, he looks into the potential impact of AI, artificial intelligence. He says he calls it the most conflict and difficult management problem humanity has ever faced. And if we failure to solve it, could be a fatal mistake for human civilization. So he's confident that we'll get better. I am too. But AI and some of the other issues that we're facing present a tremendous challenge to us, and all of us need to be aware of the potential of the risks of AI and some of the other technological developments making things worse than instead of better. So we have decade after decade after decade of improvement, prospect of it continuing to get better, but not necessarily. And I highly recommend his book to get a real thorough understanding of the qualities and the characteristics of the world as it is now and as it might be in the not too distant future. When I first got involved with this stuff, there were virtually no organizations in the world dealing with this. There were a handful, but very, very few. Now they are all over the place. The Alliance for Peace Building having some 200 organizations, a part of its network. There's something, a Europe-based partnership similar to the Alliance for Peace called Global Partnership for the Prevention of Armed Conflict. Organizations like Search for Common Ground and Mercy Corps, a peace building network in the UK, the Global Peace Building Association in Japan. All over the world, these organizations have come into being all within the last few decades. This is all new stuff. It didn't exist when I first got involved with this stuff back about 50 years ago, 60 years ago. But they're there now and provide opportunities for all of us to connect with the people and organizations we care about, to do our role, to see what we can do to make a difference. When I was a student 60 years ago, 70 years ago, there were virtually no books none using the title peace, the term peace building, very, very, very few books about how one goes about making peace. Lots of books about war and what causes war and how to win wars. Virtually none about how to build peace and make the world more peaceful. Now Amazon lists over 2,000. These are just some written by my friends, and there are many more out there. But it's a relatively new concept. I have a good friend who's a major donor to it who is very frustrated. He's in his late 90s, so he wants the world to be at peace before he passes away. And he keeps pressing me. He says, "But why don't we have peace yet?" And I say, "Well, we're working on it, but it takes time. It takes time. But we're working on it." And I show him the charts on the progress we made. He said, "But that's not good enough." I say, "Well, you're right, Mill. It's not good enough, but we're still working on it. We're learning on it from it and getting better about it. And these books help us better understand what is being done and what can be done." But books like this didn't exist when I was in school 60 years ago. They're in abundance now. And peace studies. If I had wanted to major in peace studies when I went to school over 60 years ago, I couldn't do it. They didn't exist. There were virtually no academic programs on building peace. Now there are well over 200 accredited programs around the country and around the world. Program on negotiation at Harvard Law School, the Kroc Institute at Notre Dame, the Kroc School at the University of San Diego, American University, where I've been an adjunct faculty member, in Sweden, Uppsala, and Cypri, and of course the Carter School at George Mason University, and others. There are peace studies programs all over the world now that did not exist when I went to school, when most of the rest of us went to school. They're there now. So there's an opportunity now for people to do research and to get educated and get advanced degrees in building a more peaceful world. Didn't exist decades ago. It exists now. And I have every reason to believe that it will help us continue to make progress. To me, though, the most important thing and the best thing is a new generation that's coming along. These are the two youngest Africans ever nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, Michael Nabil from Egypt and Victor Ochen from Uganda. They are dear, dear friends of mine. They come and stay with me here at my home whenever they're in the U.S. Just amazing young people. Both of them were in their 20s when they were nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize for the amazing work that they have done in their home countries. And the other phenomenon that is really kind of taking over is the role of women in building a more peaceful world. Lisa Shirk, Melanie Greenberg, Liz Hume, Melanie took over the Alliance for Peace Building when I left. Liz is now running a phenomenal leadership job she is doing there. And in the lower right picture is my dear friend Kamisa Kamara from Mali. I met Kamisa when she was in her 20s and she was here in the US, and she was part of something we call the Mali Affinity Group, which I was chairman of. And she called one day and said, Chic, the president has asked me to go back to Bamako, and I'm not sure why, but I need to go back. So she called me a week later and said, he wants me to be the foreign minister. 35 years old, foreign minister of Mali. Then made her his chief of staff. Unfortunately, he was overthrown in a coup and she had to leave the country. She's now in Michigan, teaching at the University of Michigan, but she's an amazing young lady, dear, dear friend of mine, and doing what she can to help resolve the issues in Mali and throughout the Sahel region. So I look at these young people and these women who have taken the leadership and do phenomenal work to make the world a more peaceful world. And because of people like this, I am confident that we will continue making the progress that we have made. So can we build peace? Yeah, we can. It's hard work. I was inspired by Sisyphus pushing his rock up the hill, and to see the work that we do as being so much like Sisyphus. And when Albert Camus wrote his essay on the myth of Sisyphus, and talk about Sisyphus, of course, and his rock rolling back to the bottom. And that's historically been interpreted as failure and the failure of humankind. But Camus reinterprets that. He says, yeah, that's life. We try to do things and sometimes we fail and the rock rolls back down to the bottom of the hill. But he said, as long as we have a rock, as long as we have something we believe in, something we care about, and put our shoulder to that rock and push it, there's joy in life. And I view building peace that way. It's like Sisyphus pushing his rock, and we get a little bit higher each time. And if we keep pushing that rock, keep our shoulder to the rock with joy, we can continue to make the world a more peaceful place. And with that, let me close and see if you have any questions, but that's what I had to say tonight. Thank you so much for paying attention.
That was wonderful. This is Carol. I wonder if I can ask a question. I don't know if people have their hands raised or I can't see it. I'm curious, the future 20th edition and everything that has happened in the last 4 months, and changes to support for the UN bodies, the dismantling of USAID. How are you thinking about all of this right now? And any thoughts on how that will impact where we're going?
Well, that's why I refer to Sisyphus and the rock. The rock has rolled back down way, way, way too far. I'm deeply concerned, of course, very, very concerned, mortified by what I see going on. But I maintain my faith in humanity and our capacity to overcome this. I look at what's happening in other parts of the world. I'm very distressed at what's happening in my country. I'm embarrassed by what's happening in my country, but I look at the things that are happening in many other parts of the world and say that there are still people out there who are determined to do the right thing and make progress. We still have a United Nations. It's under serious challenge, deeply underfunded, but it's still there. And I think we can pick up the pieces and resist the bad things that are going on. But I have not lost my confidence. I remain confident. And as Sisyphus said or as Camus said of Sisyphus, when the rock rolls back down, he puts his shoulder to it. He does so with joy. And I think we have to do that. We have to recognize that we have an opportunity to push the rock back up the hill. I think back to our anti-war efforts back in the 60s, and things were pretty dreadful. And our government was doing some really, really, really awful things. And yet we mobilized and made a difference. We were able to help change the attitude of the country about that war and about other wars and turn things around. And I remain confident that we'll do so this time. We dare not despair. We've got to keep at it and believe in the goodness overall of humanity and what can be done. But we got to organize and make it happen.
Beautiful. Love that. Thank you.
Chick, can I ask you to close out your PowerPoint at this point so we can get more connected, and then I'll get to Mindy. At the top of your screen, it should say stop PowerPoint, and Mindy might help step in here and help.
Yeah, it might be at the bottom of his screen. It should say stop sharing.
Well, I'm sure I'll be able to find that.
Yeah, at the bottom of your screen, there's a share
On the Zoom screen.
on the Zoom screen, and there should be a stop sharing.
And on mine, it's at the very
Pardon me
top.
for being such a klutz.
No,
Oh,
no,
that's okay.
not a
Jim,
problem.
is this your Zoom meeting?
It's my Zoom meeting.
Yeah, you can go in and turn off his share screen. Can I go ahead and ask my question?
I'll ask you a
while you're
question.
working on that? Okay. Chick, I'm very interested in when you mentioned AI. What are the concerns? I can definitely see from other other people and things that we hear in the news, but I hesitate to listen to the things in the news because, as we know, that it doesn't really represent the truth, reality of things. So I would like to know what you know of the concerns of AI are for peace for the future, and talk a little bit about that.
I think I just messed this up again. Mine are very similar. I think if it disrupts the employment cycle and opportunities for young people to get into the workplace, if you end up with a whole lot of folks out there unemployed and unable to fit into the society and the economy, that has the potential of being very, very disruptive. So that concerns me greatly. Did I cut it off?
No, you're fine.
No, you're good.
Okay. I'm messing things up here, trying to get it.
It's working perfectly, Chick. You're
Oh,
fine.
you don't need to do anything anymore. It's all set.
Okay.
Don't look. Yeah, it's handled. Everything's handled.
All right. So
Patricia,
yeah, I'm just
I'm sorry.
concerned that the same things that other people see as being concerning, and there's the potential for the bad actors taking advantage of the kind of information and analysis that can go into being disruptive. Some people with malicious intent have access to resources and capacities now that they didn't before through AI. And it can be used for good things. It can also be used for bad things. So I'm just terribly concerned. I'm optimistic, but I'm concerned about the potential application of AI, not only to disrupt our social and economic structures, but for people with ill intentions to utilize the strength and the power that AI can provide to do malice.
Thank you.
Great. Patricia Schaefer, we're glad to have you.
No, I'm so glad to be with you this evening, and thank you, Chic. You're such a great model of someone who created a small organization out of an idea that has now become a really great mobilizing force, the Alliance for Peace Building. So thank you for being a leader and a pioneer in that way. My question is, you use the word mobilize and mobilizing and mobilization this evening, and I'm just wondering what advice you would have for us as Rotarians based on this situation, this scenario. An article just appeared in the New York Times about the threat to global vaccines because of all of the changes in funding. And in that article, there is a picture of End Polio Now and reference to the fact that Rotary initiated the End Polio Now program in 1985 with Rotary, the Gates Foundation, and so on. We spent $2.6 billion to eradicate polio, and it's at risk. The idea of ending polio is at risk. So here's my question about mobilization. Rotary has 1.4 million members, and End Polio Now is the signature project of Rotary. And yet I was on a call this evening where several people feeling very overwhelmed, down in the mouth about the current situation said, what can you do? What can you do as an individual? What can even we as 1.4 million people do? We can't fight this other energy. So when you say you have to mobilize for peace, what would you tell us to do?
Well, for one thing, I'm a huge fan of what Rotary has done with regard to polio. What an amazing story. And it's an example of what can be done when private citizens come together and mobilize to make a difference. I share your concern about what's happening with the eradication of polio. It's just beyond belief that this has happened at this time in human history. I think there is probably no more influential civil society organization than Rotary worldwide. And I would like to think that John Hugo and others at Rotary International are thinking this through and thinking through a strategy for what Rotary and Rotary clubs can do to be advocates for renewing the commitment to polio and utilization of the vaccines and the treatments to continue to eradicate polio. Get into the news. But you might also, part of what mobilization is going beyond Rotary itself, and to reach out to the people and the organizations, your brother and sister organizations, community service organizations, to pull together. And if enough come together, I think that this movement in the wrong direction can be stopped and turned around. And just keep in mind, the people doing this aren't going to be there forever. They may have stopped the progress, even reversed it, but only a little bit for the time being. And the end of their influence is coming. And so be prepared to ramp back up as soon as the opportunity is there. But in the meantime, I'd be reaching out to some of the other organizations that share your concern about it and mobilize, get it into the news, and build an advocacy networks that let it be known that this is simply not acceptable, not tolerable, and that the progress made toward polio eradication must continue and that it can continue. You've demonstrated how effective it can be. Now just need to get it across the finish line, and I'd be reaching out to others as well as Rotarians to join forces with you to make it happen.
Great, thank you. Tom Baker, I believe you're next.
What was that?
Tom Baker, you're muted.
I couldn't hear that. Once again.
Tom Baker is going to ask the next question.
Pardon me.
Okay,
There
Chic,
he
that
is.
was a wonderful presentation, and I hate to think that was your last because people need to hear your message. Anyway, Rotarians have been involved in the peace work for many, many years, and involved in mainly supporting and building that culture of peace with our focus areas and our work as peace builders. But there is the peace system that we're involved in, but there's also the war system that is so many resources and are causing so much havoc in the world. So what do you think is the balance for Rotarians in being involved, building a culture of peace and opposing war and the war system?
Yeah, it's a good question because there are two sides to this coin. One of them is being against war, anti-war, and the other is building peace. As far as I'm concerned, both of them are important. In fact, I started into this stuff on the anti-war side. You know, I'm a product of the '60s, and I was ready to drop out of school and join the military and go fight the commies in Vietnam, until I did some research and found out what was really going on. And that for the Vietnamese, it was their war of national liberation, and we were standing in the way of their national liberation. So wait a second, this is wrong. And I became an anti-war activist, and pretty darn active as an anti-war activist. And I'm still an anti-war activist. I am not a pacifist. I recognize that there are times when one needs to have a military capacity for self-defense. I happen to be among those who thinks Ukraine needs to be able to defend itself from the assault from Russia. So I am very much anti-war with regard to that, but pro building peace. And as soon as that war comes to an end, building peace to help make it last. So I think one needs to, one can do both at the same time, but we only have so much time and effort we can put in. My sense is that here in the U.S., we could put more into the building peace side of it, since the United States is not directly involved in the fighting with the military anywhere, and there's a limit to how much influence we have in other places in terms of being anti-war. But I think we can do a lot for building peace. But the two are not mutually exclusive. Pro peace building and being anti-war are two sides of the same coin, and let's just make sure we get a lot of coins and make it happen.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Suresh?
Hi, that was a wonderful speech, and I really appreciate it. So my name is Suresh Moran. So I want to point out something regarding this is the most peaceful time in the history of humanity. The important point is it might be misleading because, say, during World War II, major powers like Soviet Union, Europe, UK, and US and Germany are fighting, and so conventional weapons. But the same war, if it happened now, that will be the end of the human civilization. So the weapons have become so powerful that we can't afford to have any fight between the major countries. So now the technology is developing more and more, and technology of mass destruction could be, not be like with AI and other things and biological weapons, it's getting more and more serious, right? So actually, I was doing my PhD in physics, like at University of Pittsburgh a long time ago, and I gave up physics because I decided that advancing physics leads to weapons. So I gave up physics and I started working on human relations for the last 20 years, and I did make some progress. So I think to build peace, to long-term peace, we actually have to change the way people are educated. Right now, all of our education is focused on advancing technology for every solution, right? And the reason why we have problem is, for every, even political conflicts is like in Ukraine and Middle East, all using weapons, we solve it. But ultimately, we have people has come together and come to an understanding, right? So that social relation part need to be advanced. So that requires changing our education all the way from the ground, from the kindergarten itself. We need to build peace into our education, develop skill in human relations and negotiation, everything. So that's how I think we can actually bring permanent peace to the world. I did make some progress in my research. So I think sometime I have to give a talk on that. So if someone could arrange that, I would be very happy. So, so that one I wanted to say. So thanks for your talk. And I think thanks for my opportunity to give my comment.
And
I very much appreciate your comments, and indeed, in many ways, we're on a precipice. We could either go into the worst violence in all of human history. The capacity is there to destroy everything. It worries me greatly. I have children and grandchildren, and I worry about what it's going to do to them. At the same time, as you've heard me say, we're figuring out how to deal with it and how to make the world more peaceful. We just need to make sure that the side of peace prevails, because if it doesn't, but the potential for catastrophe is very real and very present. One of the remarkable things coming out of World War II, while I thoroughly despise what was done with the nuclear weapon in Japan, the other side of that coin is that's part of what inspired the world to create the UN and to try to find other ways, because the recognition that if nuclear war were to break out again, the damage would be just indescribable worldwide. So what we're doing is pretty darn important, and what Rotary is doing is pretty darn important. And take pride in it, and do the best you can.
Yeah. One other thing I want to mention is, see, I have been working on this for last 20 years.
do you have another question, Suresh? Do you have a question?
Sorry? Yeah, I want to appreciate Rotary. I think Rotary is the only organization I think can solve this peace problem. That's what I want to mention. I tried many other organizations. Ultimately, I found Rotary is the one who actually, really involved in actually doing something about it. And I want to really appreciate it, I think. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Julie, you have your hand up.
First of all, I want to, I appreciate this opportunity to join your club. I am connecting from Michigan, and my district is both Michigan and Ontario, and so I'm thrilled to be here. I think, and I wonder, how do we take this message of peace and make it actionable in our own communities? And as I have thought about that, I think of it as two-pronged. One, it's international peace building, and the other is peace building more or less at home in our communities. On the international front, I led an effort starting 2 years ago to sponsor and welcome a Ukrainian family. We now have 2 families in our very rural community. And I built a very large coalition of churches, of Rotary clubs, of an organization called 100 Women Who Care, and others to support this effort. Now, for those of you who've been following issues, Ukraine is the only country that humanitarian parole or temporary protected status has not yet been terminated. So we are very concerned about that. For any other Rotary Club or Rotarian who would like to do something like this, they are looking for sponsors for Afghan allies to the U.S. military, and they are able to come here and actually and get citizenship. So they are not a temporary status. And there's an organization called Welcome Corps, if any of you are interested, because I think each of our communities, but it only takes a few people to actually be a sponsor group. So that's one idea. The other is in our communities. I think of, we all have groups in our communities, whether there's gangs, and so then it's bringing together gang members and the individuals in those neighborhoods who are fearful. Or right now in the US, of course, we have, quite a schism between Republicans and Democrats to have conversations among those groups. The community I had moved from 4 years ago, 2 leaders in the community, one a Republican and one a Democrat, started monthly forums where we listen and we learn. So It wasn't trying to convince other people, and it was listening and learning. It's just for 1 hour once a month, but you begin to understand people different than ourselves. Or also in my previous community, which was near Ann Arbor. Ann Arbor had groups of Jewish and Muslim women who came together to have dialogue. And so I just think for all of us to look in our own community and look where we could, that our Rotary clubs could actually become the catalyst for these conversations, because it's through listening and building relationships that I think will build a more peaceful tomorrow. And Chick, I would love to hear what else you think we can do that's very actionable in our own communities.
Well, you just described it. I think you can find others as you have done. You find others who share your interest and concern, who are part of other organizations, and build coalitions among the different people and organizations that share your concern. Um, I don't know if you're familiar with an organization called Better Angels when you're talking about the Republicans and Democrats and the divide, the political divide that's taking place. There's an organization called Better Angels that is a nationwide organization that is working on that. So you could look into teaming up with them. But again, wherever you are, there are bound to be other people and other organizations who share your ideas and concerns, and that you can team up with them. And I think different organizations working in collaboration with one another can make a huge difference.
Great. Thank you. I'll do one more quick question. Paxton, do you have just a question? We're a little over time, but go ahead and ask your question.
Also agree with what Dr. Maran was saying. I don't agree that it's the most peaceful time in history. I think that the precipice of war is ridiculously close to the United States and is all over, like with India and Pakistan and Palestine and in Africa and between the Russia and Ukraine. And so I feel that I can watch that and it sounds like it's hopeful, but it also is probably coming from a very privileged place. And I think that that's kind of an illusion to the reality sometimes. And I personally feel deep in my soul that I was born at a time of war, literally being named Athena by someone who was in the military and had put a gun to my face when I was a kid because, you know, I don't make him proud, but I am, you know, my mom was a pacifist. But regardless though, I hate my name, my birth name, Athena, and I think peace is the only way to go with that. And it's not that like, it's because there's, you know, warships in the Middle East named Athena, and the U.S. military for women's originally were using her name for genocide. And so there was some liberation for women having weapons and that, which is good, but the bottom line is war destroys the planet, it destroys the ecosystem, and we need to be better and we can use AI to make it better. And that's why I put a petition in the chat to try and change programming definitions for AI. And that's also what my website's about. But yeah, thank you for letting me speak. And I have your website on my the about the exhaust that book, and I hope to buy it someday and read about your story, Cheek. And I appreciate you so much for everything that you've done. Your life has been super amazing.
And with that, what a grateful evening. Thank you, Chick. We are so indeed grateful for what you do and what you have given and the information that you bring. We thank you for taking the time to share your knowledge and expertise with us. You know, we're going to be dark next month. I and my entire staff, otherwise known as my wife Peggy, will be in Calgary, where we love to meet all of you in person. And I hope to see you there. If you're in Calgary, I have the honor of presenting at the Peace Park, part of the House of Friendship. So we will be on the travel trailer, not sure on our return date, but in September, you spoke of a friend called Steve Kalalea. Steve Kalalea will be our presenter in September, and I'll share him your thoughts and your words. August is still up for grabs. Again, Chic, we want to thank you so very, very much for a wonderful, wonderful presentation, and all of you for sharing your thoughts.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Chick.